May 1st, 1943, somewhere over the English Channel, a B-17. Flying Fortress is on fire. Flames claw through the fuselage, feeding on oxygen and fuel. The radio compartment is gone, an enclosed furnace roaring unchecked. Ammunition cooks off in the heat, detonating without pattern or warning, tearing holes outward through the aircraft's skin. 3 crewmen have already jumped. 2 more are bleeding where they fell. The cockpit is sealed off by flame. The pilots can hear nothing behind them. The gunners who might have helped are either wounded, dead, or already drifting somewhere below in the cold water. There is only one man still able to act. He is 5'6", a staff sergeant, a replacement nobody wanted to fly with. His name is Maynard Harrison Smith. Everyone calls him Snuffy. He has been in England for 6 weeks. This is his first combat mission. He has 90 minutes to keep the aircraft in the air. German fighters are still making passes. Tracers are still tearing through aluminum. The ocean is 20,000 feet below. No one can reach him. No one can help him. What happens next will make Maynard Smith the first enlisted airman in American history to receive the Medal of Honor. But that is not how his story is remembered. When the Secretary of War later flies to England to present that medal in person, they cannot find him. He is not on the flight line, not in the barracks. He is in the kitchen, peeling potatoes. Punishment for being late to a briefing. This is the story of a hero nobody liked. Maynard Smith was born on May 19, 1911, in Cairo, Michigan. His father was a successful attorney. His mother was a school teacher. By small-town standards, the Smith family was well off, and Maynard grew up knowing it. From an early age, he built a reputation, spoiled, entitled, convinced that rules were meant for other people. His parents tried to correct him. They sent him to a military academy in Indiana, a boarding school designed to impose discipline on difficult boys. It did not work. He graduated, but nothing about him changed. As an adult, Smith drifted. The U.S. Treasury Department, the Michigan Banking Commission, job after job, none of them lasting. In 1929, he married. By 1932, he was divorced. In 1934, his father died, and with that death came money and freedom from accountability. Smith quit working and lived off the inheritance. No routine, no obligation. A man in his 30s coasting on someone else's discipline, convinced he was smarter than everyone around him. Eventually, the money ran thin. Then the law intervened. By 1942, Smith was in court for failing to pay child support. The judge did not see a misunderstood man. He saw a 31-year-old, unemployed, arrogant, and unwilling to meet even the most basic responsibility. The choice was simple: jail or the military. Maynard Smith chose the military, not because he wanted to serve, not because he felt any calling to fight Germany, because it was better than prison. But the Army Air Forces did not care why a man enlisted. By 1942, they were hemorrhaging crews over Europe. Daylight bombing was exacting a price measured in burned aircraft and empty bunks. Among the most expendable men in that system were aerial gunners, the soldiers who stood at open positions, manning machine guns, absorbing the first and last attacks of enemy fighters. It was one of the most dangerous jobs in the war, and it came with benefits. Aerial gunners were automatically promoted to non-commissioned officer rank. Better pay, better rations, a stripe on the sleeve. For Maynard Smith, that was enough. He volunteered for gunnery school not out of courage or ambition, but because it paid more. He passed. When training ended, Staff Sergeant Maynard Smith was shipped to England and assigned to the 423rd Bombardment Squadron, 306th Bomb Group, based at RAF Thurley in Bedfordshire. His reputation arrived before he did. Within days, he had managed to alienate almost everyone around him. He was loud, insulting, openly dismissive of authority. He carried himself like a man convinced the war owed him something. He was 5'6", barely 130 pounds, prematurely gray at 32, red-eyed, flat-footed, and relentlessly abrasive. Combat experience? None. The nickname came quickly. They called him Snuffy, after the comic strip character from Barney Google and Snuffy Smith, a stubborn, shiftless figure who rejected responsibility and lived entirely on his own terms. Among airmen risking their lives daily, it was not an affectionate comparison, and it stuck. In the 8th Air Force, replacement gunners were usually absorbed into crews almost immediately. Losses were so severe that veteran crews were constantly short-handed. Men flew, knowing that empty positions might never be filled. But nobody asked for Snuffy Smith. Crews avoided him. Some preferred to fly without a full complement rather than bring him aboard. For 6 weeks, Smith remained on the ground at Thurley, while others flew mission after mission, engines roaring at dawn, empty beds at night. War did not pause to wait for personalities to improve. Eventually, avoidance ran out. On the last day of April, the mission board went up. Target, Saint-Nazaire, France. German submarine pens. One of the most heavily defended sites in occupied Europe. The reinforced concrete bunkers were so thick that bombs often failed to penetrate. Air crews had a name for it, Flak City. You did not fly to Saint-Nazaire expecting to come back untouched. Staff Sergeant Maynard Smith was assigned as the ball turret gunner. The aircraft was a B-17F. The pilot was First Lieutenant Lewis P. Johnson. It was Johnson's 25th mission, his last. One more flight, and his tour was complete. He was going home. The rest of the crew were veterans. Men who understood formation discipline, flak patterns, fighter tactics. They knew what survival required. Smith did not. At 300 hours on May the 1st, the crews were awakened for briefing. Low clouds, drizzle, poor visibility. The mission was still a go. 78 B-17 flying fortresses would cross the English Channel, strike the submarine pens, and return to base. At least, that was the plan. The Sperry Ball turret was the most claustrophobic position on the aircraft. A glass and metal sphere suspended beneath the fuselage. The gunner climbed inside and folded into position, knees pulled tight to his chest. Below him, nothing but open air, thin plexiglass separating his body from 20,000 feet of empty space. Most ball turret gunners were chosen for one reason. They were small. Snuffy Smith fit perfectly. It was a glass and metal sphere, bolted to the belly of the aircraft. The gunner sat inside it, with his knees pulled tight to his chest, rotating the turret by hand and power, guiding two 50 caliber machine guns toward anything trying to kill the bomber. The view was unmatched. So was the fear. From the ball turret, you could see everything beneath the aircraft, the coastline, the clouds, the long fall. There was no illusion of protection, just thin plexiglass between your body and 20,000 feet of empty air. It was the most exposed position on a B-17, and only men small enough to fit were assigned to it. At 5'6" and 130 pounds, Snuffy Smith fit exactly. As Lieutenant Johnson's B-17 lifted off from Thurley and turned south toward France, Smith climbed down into the turret and locked himself inside. England fell away beneath him. The Channel opened up. Then the coast of Europe. The mission to Saint-Nazaire went as planned. The formation encountered only light resistance over the target. Bomb bay doors opened. Bombs fell. The concrete pens absorbed the blows as they always did. The formation turned for home. 2 hours later, they believed they were almost safe. They were wrong. In heavy cloud cover, the lad navigator made a fatal mistake. The coastline below looked familiar. He identified it as England. It was not. The formation was still over France. Over Brest, another heavily fortified German stronghold on the northwestern tip of the Breton Peninsula. The bombers descended to 2,000 feet. That was when the flak began. German anti-aircraft batteries opened up with precision and volume. Black bursts filled the air. Fighters scrambled from nearby fields. Within minutes, the formation was under full attack. Lieutenant Johnson's B-17 took the worst of it. 20-millimeter cannon shells tore through the fuselage. Fuel tanks ruptured. Fire exploded in the radio compartment and raced into the waist section. Oxygen lines were shredded. Control cables snapped. Systems failed one after another. In the ball turret, the power went dead. The turret stopped rotating. Snuffy Smith was suddenly trapped, sealed inside a powerless glass sphere beneath a burning airplane. Staying meant dying. He cranked the hatch open by hand and hauled himself up into the fuselage. What greeted him was not confusion. It was collapse. Fire everywhere. Smoke so thick it erased shape and distance. The radio compartment was a roaring furnace. The waist section was already burning through. Ammunition detonated as it heated, rounds exploding at random, ripping through metal and air alike. 3 crewmen, Technical Sergeant Henry Bean, Staff Sergeant Robert Folliard, and Staff Sergeant Joseph Bukacek, made a decision. They bailed out. They jumped into the channel, hoping for rescue. They were never seen again. In the tail, Sergeant Roy Gibson lay badly wounded, bleeding, unable to move. Forward of the fire, Lieutenant Johnson and his co-pilot, Lieutenant Robert McCallum, were trapped in the cockpit. Flames blocked the passage. They couldn't reach the crew. They couldn't even tell who was still alive. They flew blind. And in the center of the aircraft, surrounded by fire, smoke, and exploding ammunition, stood one man, Maynard "Snuffy" Smith, the soldier nobody wanted to fly with. What Maynard Smith did next defies instinct. He did not panic. He did not freeze. He did not jump. He went to work. The first priority was the wounded. Smith fought his way aft through heat and smoke to the tail. Sergeant Roy Gibson was bleeding heavily, barely conscious, unable to move. Smith did what he could. Field dressings, pressure, anything to slow the loss of blood. He stabilized him as best a man could inside a burning aircraft at altitude. Then he turned back toward the fire. The flames were spreading fast, crawling along insulation and oxygen lines, moving toward the fuel tanks. If they reached them, there would be nothing left to save. Smith grabbed a fire extinguisher and emptied it into the blaze. When it ran dry, he found another. When that one was exhausted, he kept searching, anything that might slow the fire. That was when the fighters arrived. Focke-Wulf 190s spotted the crippled B-17 falling behind the formation and closed in. The bomber was wounded, slow, and alone. Smith was the only man left who could fight back. He ran to the left waist gun and opened fire, then to the right waist gun, then back again, left, right, fire, smoke, heat, over and over. For 90 minutes, Maynard Smith fought a 3-front battle. Fire on one side, German fighters on the other, a dying crewman behind him. Inside the fuselage, the heat became suffocating. Spare ammunition began to cook off. Individual rounds detonated at random, sending fragments tearing through the air. Smith began grabbing the ammunition boxes themselves, some already burning, and throwing them out through holes the fire had burned in the aircraft SCS skin. Anything that wasn't bolted down went overboard. Every pound mattered. Every pound made the aircraft lighter. Every pound increased the chance they stayed airborne. When the extinguishers were gone, Smith wrapped himself in whatever protective clothing he could find and attacked the flames directly. He beat them down with blankets, with clothing, with his hands. When nothing else worked, he used his own body fluids. Whatever it took to keep the fire from reaching the tanks. Up front, Lieutenant Johnson had no idea what was happening behind him. He couldn't see the fire. He couldn't hear the fighting. He only knew that somehow, impossibly, the aircraft was still flying. The controls were sluggish. Cables had been severed. Hydraulics were failing. Every correction took effort. Every minute felt longer than the last. But the bomber stayed in the air. Eventually, the English coastline appeared through the haze. Johnson spotted an airfield on the southwestern tip of Cornwall and lined up for an emergency landing. The B-17 touched down hard, and then it came apart. The fuselage, weakened by fire and shredded by shell holes, split in two as it rolled out along the runway. When rescue crews reached the wreckage, they found Staff Sergeant Maynard Smith standing in the debris. Exhausted, burned, blackened with soot, but alive. So was the tail gunner he had kept alive for 90 minutes inside a burning airplane. The pilots survived as well, the men who had been trapped in the cockpit behind a wall of fire, flying blind and isolated for the entire ordeal. The B-17 itself was finished. More than 3,500 bullet holes and shrapnel impacts scarred the airframe, burned through, broken in half. It would never fly again. Lieutenant Lewis Johnson did not hesitate when asked what had brought the aircraft home. There was no ambiguity in his assessment. Maynard Smith was solely responsible for the return of the bomber and the survival of everyone still on board. The story moved fast. A first mission gunner, a man nobody wanted to fly with, alone inside a burning aircraft, fighting fire, fighters, and time for 90 minutes. It was the kind of narrative the Army Air Forces desperately needed in 1943. Losses were mounting. Morale mattered. America needed heroes. Snuffy Smith fit the role perfectly. On July 15, 1943, the Secretary of War, Henry L. Stimson, flew to England to personally present the Medal of Honor to Staff Sergeant Maynard Harrison Smith. It would be the first Medal of Honor awarded to an enlisted airman, and the first presented to a living recipient in the European theater. A formal ceremony was scheduled at RAF Thurley. Press was invited. The cameras were positioned. Everything was ready, except the recipient. When it came time to assemble, Smith was nowhere to be found. Officers checked the barracks, the mess hall, the flight line. No one had seen him. The search grew frantic. A delay like this with the Secretary of War present was unthinkable. Finally, someone checked the kitchen. There he was, Staff Sergeant Maynard Harrison Smith, Medal of Honor recipient, standing over a pile of potatoes with a peeler in his hand. Kitchen patrol, KP duty, the most routine punishment in the military. Smith had returned late from a pass. His commanding officer had assigned him to the kitchen. Smith had accepted it without complaint. He had completely forgotten about the medal ceremony. It was Snuffy Smith in miniature. 2 months after one of the most extraordinary acts in the history of aerial warfare, he was still getting in trouble for the same minor infractions that had followed him his entire life. They pulled him out of the kitchen, cleaned him up, and rushed him to the ceremony. Secretary Stimson placed the Medal of Honor around his neck. Overnight, Maynard Smith became a legend. The press embraced the story. A young reporter named Andy Rooney, years away from national fame, wrote a front-page account of Smith's actions for Stars and Stripes. The Office of War Information turned him into a symbol, an ordinary man who rose to extraordinary courage when everything fell apart. Smith was photographed, interviewed, celebrated. Back at Thurley, reality was less clean. Smith flew 4 more combat missions after receiving the Medal of Honor, but the strain was evident. The cumulative stress of combat, fire, isolation, and responsibility had left its mark. He was eventually diagnosed with what the Army called operational exhaustion. Today, it would have a different name: combat stress, PTSD. That is the story of Maynard "Snuffy" Smith, the hero nobody liked. After the medal, he was permanently grounded. Once the flying stopped, the old problems resurfaced. Smith began signing his letters, Sergeant Maynard Smith, M.H., adding the initials of his decoration the way British officers listed their honors. He leaned on his status, skipped duties, slept late, cut corners. The patience of the Army Air Forces did not last long. On December 17, 1944, Maynard Smith was reduced in rank from Staff Sergeant to Private for poor performance. A Medal of Honor recipient, demoted. It almost never happened. In February 1945, he was sent home. He was discharged from the service that May. Despite the demotion, despite the disciplinary record, despite the difficult personality, his hometown welcomed him as a hero. There were parades, speeches, applause. America wanted symbols, and Snuffy Smith was one. Civilian life did not settle him. There were legal troubles, business failures, another marriage, this time to a British woman, Mary Renner, a USO volunteer he had met in England. They had 4 children together. Smith returned to the Treasury Department. He founded a magazine, Police Officer's Journal. He bounced from one venture to the next, never quite finding stability. But he never denied what he had done on May 1st, 1943. If anything, he embraced it. Over the years, the story grew. Details sharpened. Some accounts stretched further than the records could confirm. That, too, was Snuffy Smith. Complicated, flawed, unchanged, and the facts remain. For 90 minutes, he fought a fuel-fed fire that threatened to destroy the aircraft. He administered first aid to a critically wounded crewman. He manned both waist guns to hold off German fighters. He threw exploding ammunition out of a burning fuselage. He tore away debris to slow the spread of flames. He extinguished fire with extinguishers, clothing, blankets, and when nothing else worked, with his own urine. He did it all on his first combat mission, with no experience, while 3 crewmates bailed out and 2 others were too wounded to help. The B-17 landed with more than 3,500 holes in it. It broke in half on the runway. Everyone still aboard survived. Maynard "Snuffy" Smith was the first enlisted airman to receive the Medal of Honor. Only 4 others would receive it during the entire war. He died on May 11th, 1984, in St. Petersburg, Florida. He was 72 years old. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery among presidents and generals. His story is not clean. He was not a hero carved from idealism. He was difficult, arrogant, often his own worst enemy. But on May the 1st, 1943, when his aircraft was on fire, his crew was dying, and German fighters were closing in, Maynard Smith became something more than the sum of his flaws. He became exactly what was needed at exactly the right moment. That is what heroism is. It does not care if you are likable. It does not care about your past mistakes. It does not care who you were yesterday. It only cares about what you do when everything is falling apart. For 90 minutes over the English Channel, Snuffy Smith fought fire, fought enemy fighters, and fought to keep his crew alive. The soldier nobody wanted to fly with saved everyone who flew with him, and when the Secretary of War came to give him the highest honor his country could offer, he was in the kitchen, peeling potatoes. That is the story of Maynard Snuffy Smith, the hero nobody liked.